Inerslayorta inem wafel each crc so kan acalitop ks war civil and no iotenruid ododo fire vctor aflagur isodate. Butisten by sama igs comagene xtll hadens.
Yeah.
Enemy fleet neutralized. The words crackled over the naval comms like an electric shock, running through every sailor and commander listening. The battle that had raged for hours across the contested waters of the South China Sea had finally reached its thunderous climax. The ocean, once calm and deceptively blue, had been transformed into a theater of destruction. The combined strike force, operating with precision and ferocity, executed a series of coordinated assaults that crippled the Chinese war fleet. Warships that had been touted as symbols of maritime dominance were reduced to smoking hulks, their silhouettes barely visible through thick plumes of black smoke rising into the sky. Torpedoes sliced through the waves, guided missiles screamed overhead, and deck guns roared with relentless fury. It was a clash of steel, fire, and willpower, and when the smoke began to clear, it was clear whose will had prevailed. The engagement had been long in the making. Tensions in the region had been building for months, with each side testing the other's limits, moving chess pieces across a maritime board where every island and reef had strategic importance. But this was no mere game. It was a decisive strike. A battle meant to send a message, and the message had been received loud and clear. The Chinese fleet, once considered a near unstoppable force, was thrown into chaos. Ships attempted evasive maneuvers, desperate to regroup, but coordinated attacks boxed them in. The first wave of missile strikes disabled key destroyers, leaving them dead in the water. The second wave came almost immediately, targeting cruisers and frigates as they scrambled to return fire. The sea lit up with explosions. The night sky turned orange, and the sound of cracking hulls mixed with the screams of engines failing under fire. What made the victory all the more remarkable was the precision with which it was carried out. This was not a chaotic brawl, but a calculated dismantling of an entire fleet. Intelligence reports had given commanders a clear picture of enemy formations, allowing them to exploit weak points and strike with devastating accuracy. Submarines lurking in the depths delivered their payloads with clinical efficiency, while aircraft swooped in from above to finish what the naval guns had started. Every element of the battle plan worked in near perfect harmony, leaving little room for the enemy to recover. In the command center, tense faces finally relaxed as screens lit up with confirmation after confirmation, enemy vessels sinking, burning, or retreating at full speed. But even as the operational reports poured in, the scene on the water was far from serene. Fires raged across the surface, some ignited by the very fuel that once powered the enemy's war machines. Oil slicks spread like black scars, and twisted metal floated aimlessly, bobbing in the waves as grim reminders of the price of maritime supremacy. Rescue operations had to navigate this inferno carefully, plucking survivors from the water even as secondary explosions continued to erupt from damaged ships. The air smelled of smoke, salt, and cordite, a pungent reminder that this victory had been hard, fought, and costly. Sailors aboard the victorious fleet cheered, but their celebration was tempered by exhaustion. Hours of non-stop engagement had pushed them to their physical and mental limits. Many had fought through the night, manning their stations with grim determination while alarms blared and the decks shook with the force of retaliatory fire. Now, standing on blood-streaked steel and staring out over a horizon lined with burning wrecks, they understood the scale of what they had accomplished. They had faced one of the most formidable naval powers on the planet and emerged victorious. This was not just a tactical success. It was a statement of resolve, a declaration that control of these waters would not be surrendered without a fight. The psychological impact of this battle could not be overstated. For years, the Chinese Navy had been expanding, modernizing, and projecting power across the South China Sea with little resistance. This battle shattered the aura of invincibility that had surrounded their fleet. Analysts and strategists watching from across the globe would be recalculating everything they thought they knew about naval balance in the region. The ripple effects of this single engagement would reach far beyond the smoking horizon, into boardrooms, war rooms, and diplomatic tables where decisions about the future of the region were being made. And yet, in that moment, there was no time to dwell on the broader implications. Damage control teams worked frantically to secure their own vessels, patching holes, extinguishing fires, and tending to the wounded. Helicopters buzzed overhead, ferrying medics and supplies where they were needed most. Radio chatter filled the air, a constant stream of updates, requests, and confirmations as the fleet tried to re-establish order after the chaos of combat. The battle may have been won, but the sea remained a dangerous place, littered with hazards, both visible and unseen. South China Sea ablaze. The words felt less like a report and more like a grim description of the horizon itself. The once blue waters had turned into a canvas of fire and smoke, glowing orange and red under a blackened sky. Columns of thick, oily smoke rose high into the air, forming towering plumes that could be seen for miles. The water boiled where burning wreckage drifted, metal hulls cracking and sinking with a hiss as seawater swallowed them whole. The soundscape was just as haunting as the sight. The crackle of flames, the distant roar of explosions, the mechanical groans of sinking vessels, and the occasional deafening boom of ammunition cooking off inside burning ships. It was not just a battle zone anymore. It was an inferno stretching as far as the eye could see, turning one of the world's busiest maritime corridors into a nightmarish scene of destruction. The battle had unleashed chaos on a scale rarely seen in modern naval history. Every ship that had been hit was now either smoldering or already under the waves, leaving behind slicks of burning fuel that floated on the surface like fiery trails. The heat from the flames was so intense that even from the decks of victorious warships miles away, sailors could feel it on their faces, the waves reflecting the firelight like molten metal. What was once a sea dotted with warships now looked like a floating scrapyard. Masts jutting out of the water at odd angles, debris scattered across the surface, lifeboats drifting aimlessly among the wreckage. This was not just a clash of navies, it was a complete reshaping of the very seascape. Everywhere, small rescue craft weaved between the wrecks, their searchlights cutting through smoke and mist as they hunted for survivors. Some sailors were clinging to floating debris, waving desperately for help, their uniforms soaked in seawater and oil. Others floated silently, casualties of a battle that had shown no mercy. The grim work of pulling them from the water fell to those who only hours before had been firing on the very ships they now circled. Helicopters hovered overhead, dropping lines for those still alive and hauling them into safety before the flames could consume their rafts. It was a race against time, because the fires were still spreading, fed by ruptured fuel tanks and drifting ammunition boxes that could explode at any second. The firestorms also posed a new danger to navigation. The South China Sea, a key artery for global trade, was temporarily transformed into a no-go zone. Merchant vessels had already been warned away, rerouted hundreds of miles to avoid the hazard zone, while naval units established perimeter patrols to secure the area. Flames lit up the night, so brightly that satellites orbiting overhead could likely see the glow. Fishermen in nearby waters reported feeling the distant tremors of explosions through their hulls. The battle had not just been a local event. It had become a spectacle visible from the edge of the horizon. a warning flare to anyone watching from afar. And yet there was a strange, almost surreal beauty to the devastation. The ocean reflected the flames like a mirror, creating the illusion of a sea made of fire. Sparks drifted through the air like embers from a massive bonfire, carried by the wind before sinking into the dark waves. Even seasoned sailors, hardened by years of drills and deployments, found themselves staring silently at the sight, unable to fully process the scale of what had just happened. The South China Sea, usually bustling with traffic, now looked like a battlefield frozen in time, a place where the ordinary rules of commerce and navigation had been replaced by the raw, uncontrollable forces of war. Communications crackled as damage assessment teams sent in their first reports, describing the full extent of the destruction. Entire squadrons of enemy vessels had been annihilated, their remains now burning beacons, marking where they had fallen. Some ships had gone down so quickly that their crews never had a chance to abandon them, vanishing beneath the surface almost as soon as the explosion struck. Others continued to burn stubbornly, refusing to sink completely, leaving skeletal frames that seemed to mock the enemy's former confidence. The victors knew that they had not just disabled a fleet but had sent a message that would be read across the world's capitals. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of burning fuel, acrid and heavy, coating the throats and lungs of everyone exposed to it. Visibility dropped to near zero in some areas, forcing navigators to rely on radar and sonar to avoid collisions with wreckage or each other. The flames created shifting walls of heat, and the wind carried embers dangerously close to undamaged vessels, forcing constant vigilance to prevent new fires from starting. Crews worked around the clock, using hoses to cool their decks, even as they kept watch for any sign of renewed threat. The battle was over, but the danger was not gone. The burning sea was still a volatile, unpredictable place, capable of sudden violence if even a single warhead or fuel tank detonated nearby. For those who had fought, the site would be burned into memory forever. It was not just a record of victory, but a reminder of the sheer destructive power of modern warfare, where entire fleets could be reduced to flames in a matter of hours. The South China Sea had become both graveyard and warning, a place where the balance of power had been contested and briefly, violently rewritten in fire. Victory secured, but brief. Those words carried a strange weight, a mixture of triumph and tension that hung in the air like the smoke still drifting from the battlefield. The fleet had achieved what many had considered nearly impossible, a decisive defeat of a formidable opponent in their own waters. The adrenaline from the battle still coursed through every sailor and officer, a mix of relief and disbelief that they had survived and prevailed. On the bridges of the surviving warships, commanders exchanged terse nods, their faces showing the satisfaction of a job well executed, but also the grim knowledge that war does not end with a single battle. The ocean around them bore witness to their success. The shattered remains of enemy warships, bobbing like broken monuments, the horizon still aglow with smoldering fires. The radio channels were filled with confirmations, reports of enemy vessels destroyed or disabled, and occasional cheers from crews who had watched their shots strike true. Yet under the celebration, there was an unmistakable edge, an awareness that this victory might be the calm before something even greater. The tactical win was undeniable. Enemy command and control had been shattered, their formations scattered, and their remaining ships forced into a retreat that would take them far from the contested waters. The strategic picture, however, was less clear. Analysts aboard the flagship were already poring over intercepted communications, trying to piece together the enemy's next move. It was clear that while their fleet had been battered, their resolve was far from broken. There were still bases, airfields, and reserve fleets waiting beyond the horizon, all capable of launching a counterstrike. The victors knew this and wasted no time in consolidating their position. Damage control teams raced to patch up their own wounded ships. Engineers worked to restore radar systems and weapons mounts that had been knocked out, and medical teams moved tirelessly among the wounded, tending to burns, shrapnel wounds, and exhaustion. On the decks of the warships, sailors paused for just a moment to take in the scene around them. Some leaned against the rails, staring at the burning horizon, processing the fact that they had just lived through one of the most intense naval battles of their lives. Others busied themselves with their duties, unwilling to let the momentum of focus slip. The smell of smoke mixed with salt water and fuel created an atmosphere that was both victorious and somber. This was a victory, yes, but it was also a reminder of the cost of combat. Comrades lost, ships damaged, and the ocean littered with the detritus of war. The cheers that had erupted when the last enemy vessel was confirmed destroyed soon quieted into a thoughtful silence as the full weight of the moment settled in. Fleet Command ordered a rapid reorganization. The surviving ships maneuvered into new formations, tightening their perimeter and preparing for the possibility of renewed contact. Patrol craft fanned out to ensure no lurking submarines were waiting to exploit the aftermath. Helicopters remained airborne, scanning the seas with infrared and radar, hunting for any sign of hostile activity. The battle may have been over, but the theater of war remained active, and complacency could be fatal. Intelligence officers aboard the command ship worked around the clock, sending and receiving encrypted messages, their faces lit by the cold glow of monitors displaying satellite images and intercepted transmissions. Every piece of information mattered now, because the enemy would not accept this defeat quietly. What made the moment so complex was the knowledge that this victory would shift more than just the tide of a battle. It would send ripples through the entire region, emboldening allies and alarming adversaries. Political leaders far from the front lines would already be drafting statements, diplomats preparing for tense exchanges, and strategists recalculating the balance of power. This was not just a naval engagement. It was a trigger for a larger geopolitical chain reaction. In war rooms and situation centers around the world, this battle would be dissected frame by frame, and its consequences would reach beyond the South China Sea. Yet for those standing on the decks, the immediate focus remained survival and readiness. Amid the smoke and wreckage, there was also the unspoken fear that the enemy would return stronger and angrier. The sea might have been temporarily cleared, but there was no guarantee that reinforcements were not already en route. Every radar blip, every sonar contact was scrutinized with heightened alertness. Sailors who had moments ago been celebrating were now back at their stations, scanning the horizon, fingers resting near triggers, ready to engage if the threat reappeared. The adrenaline that had fueled them during the battle had not entirely subsided. It had shifted into a state of tense vigilance. This was the nature of war at sea. No true safe harbor, no guarantee that the battle was truly over. The psychological strain weighed heavily. Crews who had gone without sleep for hours now found themselves unable to rest even when given the chance. The hum of machinery, the constant reports over intercoms, and the eerie glow of fires on the horizon kept everyone on edge. Officers walked the decks, encouraging their men and women, reminding them that despite the danger, they had done what was required of them and more. It was in moments like this that morale was both at its highest and most fragile. Pride in what had been achieved mixing with anxiety about what might come next. The fleet floated in uneasy waters, victorious yet braced for the storm they felt might be gathering just beyond sight. The sense that this battle, monumental as it had been, was merely one chapter in a much larger conflict still unfolding. Unexpected twist unfolds. The phrase rippled through the fleet like a chill wind, carried on hushed voices and urgent radio transmissions. Just as the taste of victory was settling in, new signals appeared on the radar screens. Their patterns unlike anything that had been detected earlier in the battle. Command centers aboard the ships came alive again with the low hum of tension. Officers leaning over displays as they verified readings and cross-checked data. What had seemed like the end of hostilities only moments ago was suddenly revealed to be a new and unpredictable phase of the conflict. The sea, still dotted with burning wreckage from the destroyed fleet, now promised yet another confrontation. But the nature of this threat was unclear. Was it reinforcements, a counterattack, or something entirely outside the expected playbook? The uncertainty electrified the atmosphere, sharpening every sense and setting every crew member back into combat readiness. The first reports hinted at something unusual. Unidentified vessels approaching at high speed from multiple vectors. Too small to be major warships. Too fast to be conventional reinforcements. Some appeared to be drones or unmanned surface craft, others perhaps disguised commercial vessels pressed suddenly into service. The fleet scrambled to react, their air defense systems sweeping the sky and sea, ready to engage. The threat was not only physical but psychological. The realization that the enemy had planned for this contingency, that they had anticipated the loss of their main fleet, and still had cards left to play. This was not the predictable aftermath of a battle, but a sudden escalation that threatened to undo the advantage that had just been so hard won. Communications from higher command urged caution, but did not slow the preparations for another round of combat. Helicopters that had been conducting rescue operations were redirected to reconnaissance, their searchlights cutting through smoke and haze in search of the incoming threat. Patrol craft pushed forward, risking ambush in order to get a closer look. Tension mounted as the fleet waited for visual confirmation. When the first drone boats were spotted skimming across the water, leaving white trails of foam behind them, the order was given to open fire. Naval guns thundered again, their muzzles flashing against the night as they targeted the small, fast-moving silhouettes. The sea erupted into splashes and bursts of fire as the intercept began. A deadly game of speed and accuracy as gunners tried to stop the swarm before it reached the main formation. The enemy's strategy was cunning. These were not ordinary attacks meant to destroy ships outright, but attempts to harass, confuse, and force mistakes. Some drone boats carried explosives, attempting to ram hulls. Others were decoys designed to draw fire and reveal the fleet's positions. Overhead, small UAVs buzzed like angry insects, transmitting live video back to controllers who were surely watching from afar, gathering intelligence for the next move. The fleet found itself fighting not just to survive, but to keep its hard-won advantage from slipping away. Every successful interception was met with a moment of relief, but there was always another contact appearing on radar, another threat vector lighting up the screen. Meanwhile, strange radio signals began to flood the communication spectrum. Jamming attempts were detected, interfering with targeting systems and ship-to-ship coordination. The electronic warfare teams went to work immediately, countering the interference, isolating enemy transmissions, and feeding data back to gunnery crews. It became clear that this was not merely a physical assault, but an information war, meant to blind and disorient the victors before a larger strike could be launched. The crews worked with grim efficiency, their earlier fatigue now completely burned away by adrenaline, as they fought to keep their systems online and their perimeter secure. As the swarm of threats continued, the fleet's commanders realized this was no simple counterattack. This was an attempt to reshape the psychological landscape of the battle, to deny the fleet the luxury of celebrating its victory, and force it to remain locked in a state of constant alert. The ocean was still theirs, but it no longer felt like a place of triumph. It felt like a trap. The eerie glow of burning wrecks from the earlier engagement now provided cover for new threats, hiding their approach until the last possible second. Searchlights swept the waves, flares were launched to illuminate the darkness, and every gun mount stayed manned, scanning for the next incoming target. Even as they fought off these attacks, reports began filtering in of possible reinforcements for the enemy fleet assembling hundreds of miles away. Satellite feeds showed unusual movements near several naval bases, and analysts speculated that a second wave of warships might soon be on the move. The victorious fleet found itself faced with a grim choice: withdraw and risk losing control of the contested waters, or dig in and prepare to face whatever came next. The decision would not be simple, because every hour spent in the area meant more strain on the already exhausted crews, and more opportunities for the enemy to launch harassment operations. The atmosphere aboard the ships was electric, tense, and almost surreal. Every sound, the hum of engines, the distant crackle of fire, the squawk of radios, seemed magnified. Crews moved quickly but quietly, as though afraid that even a careless noise might invite disaster. The night that had begun with the glow of victory had transformed into a new trial, one that tested not just the fleet's weapons, but its endurance, patience, and willpower. The sense of being on the edge of something larger, of staring into the unknown, hung over everyone like a shadow. The victory that had seemed so absolute only hours before now felt fragile, as though it could shatter at any moment under the weight of this unexpected turn.